So we have been on this road trip with Jesus so far this summer. And one of the things that I find is a great bonus on any road trip is when you get the opportunity to stop and see old friends along the way. Now, sometimes we plan out these visits, but other times it's more of a spur-of-the-moment thing. And so you call them up from the road and say, hey, I'm about 15, 20 minutes away. You mind if we stop by for a bit? And Christy and I have never been told no, so that's good. And it's great because we get to go and hang out with our friends and catch up with people we haven't seen in a while. I say it's great. It's great for us, the visitors. But what if you're the host? Raise your hand if surprise company ever stresses you out. Because you want to present a good experience for them. You want to welcome them, so you run around those last few minutes cleaning what you can, putting the dishes away, picking up the kids' toys. Or maybe you don't. Depends on who's coming over, right? But we certainly try to make our guests feel welcome, to provide good hospitality. And that idea is at the core of our gospel story today. And maybe more than a few of us can identify with Martha. See, as we continue our road trip with Jesus, we find ourselves stopping off in the town of Bethany as Jesus visits some friends, Mary and Martha. Now, these two sisters have popped up a couple of times in the Gospels. Their brother Lazarus is the one who Jesus will raise from the dead. That happens later. This time, Jesus is just stopping by for a visit. Well, him and his disciples, which always adds more stress when you know there's a crowd coming. But during this visit, Jesus teaches a lesson to Mary and Martha, to his disciples, and to us about the kind of hospitality that makes him feel welcome. And so he enters the house, and immediately we find two things going on. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, hanging on every word. Martha, on the other hand, is racing around, trying to be the good host, trying to take care of her guests. And she's ticked off that her sister isn't helping. Can you blame her? But according to Jesus, Mary is doing what matters most. And he rebukes Martha gently. He says to her, Martha, Martha. Like whenever Jesus repeats your name, it's kind of a, come on. Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. Now, on the surface, Martha is just trying to be hospitable. She's trying to fulfill her role as host as best she can. Jesus and his disciples are in the living room, and they're talking. And she's getting food ready. She's laying out a spread. She's making sure that feet were washed and drinks are filled. She's doing what she's supposed to do. In their society, hospitality was a virtue. It was one of the most important aspects of any relationship. The worst thing you could do was make a guest, a friend or a stranger, feel unwelcome. Even today in the Middle East, hospitality is a major virtue. The host who welcomes you takes joy in having the opportunity to feed you and care for you. You are under their protection. It's ingrained in their society and has been for thousands of years. So what Martha is doing here is she's trying to live life as she knows it. And that's the problem. Because Jesus is in the other room, teaching and talking about God and the kingdom, revealing divine truth. But Martha is so distracted by her duties, so worried about getting everything right and ready, that Jesus is just background noise. And it's understandable, because Martha is conditioned to believe that everything she's doing is important. And so are we. Think of all of the things that we are conditioned by our society to believe are too important to stop to listen to Jesus. The things that we worry about, the things that we get distracted by, the things that we have grown up believing are so important. The first of those things that pops to mind is usually money and possessions. How we let those things silence the voice of Jesus in pursuit of them. But let's think deeper. Think about the other things we think are important. Do we let the things that entertain us drown out the voice of Jesus? Do we know more about Game of Thrones than we do about the gospel of Jesus? Or do we know more about Star Wars? I don't want to leave myself out. Or do we know more about The Bachelor? Do we let the things that entertain us distract us from the voice of Jesus? Do we let our desire for security keep us from hearing Him? As we worry more about people taking from us, whether they be breaking into our homes or crossing our borders, do we worry more about them taking from us than us sharing what God has abundantly given us to share? Do we let our politics, do we let our prejudices, do we even let our own patriotism turn Jesus into background noise? In racing around to ensure that we are living life as we know it, how often do we stop just to hear what Jesus is telling us? See, our worries and distractions prevent us from developing an authentic faith. So what can we do? We can be like Mary. Mary, who stops everything and sits at Jesus' feet to listen. But Mary is doing so much more than just hanging out and avoiding her nagging sister. What Mary is doing here is revolutionary. The gospel writer Luke uses the words, "She sat at the Lord's feet and listened." It's more than just polite listening. That is the language of becoming a disciple. To sit at a teacher's feet and listen to them was to do more than be respectful. To sit at their feet and listen was to devote yourself to following them. And that's what she's doing. But that's not what women were supposed to do. See, in her day, women weren't expected to be disciples. They were expected to support the men, to race around the house and make the food and put out the drinks and set out the spread. They were meant to do that. They were expected to do that. They were brought up to do that. That's what was important. But not to Mary. She is not having any of that because she sees that Jesus is more important than it. And so she defies social expectations. She defies their demands. She casts off life as she knows it. Even at the risk of the ridicule of her sister and society, she casts it all off to begin her journey on the road with Jesus. Last week, we talked about how Jesus calls us and enables us to walk in ways that don't seem natural or reasonable or possible. Last week, we looked at Peter walking on the water. This week, it's Mary having the faith to put aside everything she knows for Him. And Jesus defends her. He says, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but there is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which won't be taken away from her." One thing that truly matters, one thing that is truly important. It's Jesus and His Word. Not that these other things aren't important. Not that Martha is essentially sinning because she's running around putting things together. No, it's good to put out food and to host. Jesus isn't condemning her for doing it, just for being obsessed with it and not hearing Him. Likewise, all of the things that I said that we are conditioned to believe are important are not necessarily bad, but it's how much we let them drown out Jesus that makes them the problem. See, Jesus says Mary chose the better part. And it's better because none of those things that we're conditioned to believe are important can save us. None of them will lead us out of life as we know it to life as Jesus knows it. So in this story, Martha demands that Jesus supports her plans. But Mary casts aside everything to follow His plans. And this is the kind of hospitality that Jesus wants. This is how we make Him feel welcome in our homes, in our lives. See, Jesus feels most welcome when we put following Him over every other concern. When His priorities become our priorities, when we cast aside life as we know it to follow Him on the road. So my question for you this week is, what distracts you from really listening to Jesus? What has been drowning out His voice? I want you to think about this week. And if you've taken one of our journals, I want you to write about it this week. And there's plenty more out there if you want one. But whatever you come up with, whatever winds up on that list, I want to encourage you to cast it aside. To ask Jesus for the strength to cast it aside. Because nothing is as important as growing in the faith and knowledge of Jesus Christ. Amen? Amen. Amen.